All right. Make sure everything's good. All right. Okay. Well, great. Thanks so much for joining us today for CAPES training. Today's topic is CAPES application entry. I'm Susie Tompkins, part of the Application Support Unit, ASU, and we are under the Data and Application Support section, or DASS. So you're joining us today to learn about application entry. So of course, we'll start out with some basics. We'll talk about how to get started searching out those Notice of Funding Availability or NOFAs, which leads you to adding an application. We'll actually talk about application entry on a screen-by-screen basis, going through all of the areas we regularly touch on, and end with some FAQs in the end. And like I said, we will have some live training activities, and definitely encourage you to follow along, and then also use that access at a later point to check in. As we go along, feel free to raise your hand or drop something into the chat if you have any questions. So application entry, in terms of CAPES, this is the first stage in tracking what are possible awards and contracts and projects in CAPES. Of course, we use CAPES rather than just keeping it to our spreadsheets or other non-systemic tracking systems, is not only to allow us to manage and track, keep an eye on all the details, but it also allows us to keep an overall picture, both along the stages and as we hand applications off into standard agreements and contracts, and we're handing these off along the way throughout HCD. Because of course, when an application gets started, it just doesn't just stay with our PDI teams. If it becomes an award and a contract, gets handed off along the way, and a lot of those details get started at the application stage. So of course, we use CAPES, and our goal is for accurate entry and complete entry of all the data in that very extensive application, and that is gathered through the application process and then across the loan and grant lifecycle. Keeping in mind that if we can keep our data full, complete, and clean, then our ability to not only report out, but to track accurately and better understand how we're doing is always improved. In terms of CAPES access, you'll need access for the particular program if you don't have access to all programs. In terms of security groups, application entry is one of the main ones you'll need, but typically also parties admin. If you're not remembering parties admin, that is the access to add and or edit parties, that is any individual or entity in CAPES. So especially at the application stage, this is one of the times where we may be needing to add new data in. And as we go along, we'll take a look at CAPES access. And of course, you'll need that submitted application. These days, it's usually a digital copy. Depending on the program, some programs actually have the opportunity to do an application upload. Keep in mind that today's training is specific to entry for CAPES, so this is not going through and explaining all of those many sheets in the application that is submitted. For questions about that, check in with your manager or the program manager to better understand where to find all that data. And lastly, in terms of application entry, we know that the details that are received from the beginning and all of the data that is in an application, there is a lot of it. As you first get going, knowing where to look on which different sheets in the document and getting that data all entered, getting your rhythm down can vary widely. So depending on how much data you have, it could take 30 minutes to an hour. Um, this is a definite key place to remember to click submit, which is the save button in CAPES. We'll emphasize this a lot, but keep in mind, especially if you have to jump in and out of doing this data entry, maybe we don't have everything all from the beginning. Make sure that you're always saving your data as you enter. Because we are talking about data entry, let's take that moment for data integrity. Every HCD employee is expected to follow all identified guidelines that allow HCD to provide accurate information which is readily available for the public, stakeholders, and executive leadership upon request. HCD's expectation for data integrity is completeness, accuracy, and timeliness. In terms of data entry, it begins at the Notice of Funding Availability or NOFA screen. You see in this one, we've got a nice red box around that Add Application. So when we get started, there are two ways to search. Um, Actually, you could probably search in a number of different ways, but we recommend going through the NOFA search. We consider that typically quicker. You could also go by program. Now is a good time to let you know if you revisit this slide deck at the beginning and as we go through different sections, these are links to jump to different areas. So feel free to use it interactively if you go back to the slide deck that is posted on the Application Support Unit SharePoint page. So in terms of searching by NOFA, to get started, of course, we have to get over to that NOFA search screen. And at a minimum, we usually recommend choosing that program short name. You can either set the NOFA status, maybe you indicate the NOFA year, just give it a little bit of a few parameters. For newer programs, such as HomeKey and Accelerator, you may only need to choose a program short name. For something like MHP or a number of the programs that have been around for a while, you're definitely going to want more parameters to narrow your search results down. So set those up and click search. And once you find the right NOFA in your search results, you actually click the NOFA name link and it'll jump you right to that NOFA details screen. You can see here, we're in View NOFA Details, and we could go right into Add Application. If you choose to go search by program for some reason, you'd click over to that program search screen. And again, we encourage using the program short name in the drop-down list. This place, you just need to get to the program screen, so click Search. And in those search results, click the program short name link. And here you'll notice in the tabs under the View Program Details, we have Fund Transactions as the default screen. You click on the tab for NOFA, and now you'll see all of the NOFAs for that program. The easiest way to search might be by NOFA year. Click the headers, column headers to sort up and down. You'll notice this one has 29, so if you really want to see all of them, you have to click that all link at the bottom. Once you find the right NOFA, you'll want to click again the NOFA name link to get to the View NOFA Details screen. Once you're on the View NOFA Details screen, the Applications tab is the first one or the default. So just land this right there. To add a new application, we just click Add Application. When we do that, it'll land us at the Application General Info screen. And that's where we begin our journey. So here, again, just to emphasize, these are jumping you to the different sections of the training slide deck. If you need a reminder or want to review this, our process PDFs are also set up to help you jump around to the different sections you need. In application entry, there are 10 main screens. Very important, even if the links are active, make sure that you're clicking submit to save each screen and the data you've entered, and then move to the next one. And especially if you're moving backwards, make sure you're clicking submit first to save any data you've entered. General info screen, there's not a lot here, but we do have some required fields. Those are always indicated by a red asterisk. So here we have our application receipt, date and time. When did we receive the application, or when are we marking it as received? You'll see jurisdiction representative. This is not a required field, but you really should consider it required field. This we are currently using to indicate the PDI representative assigned to the application. You will also see program jurisdiction. This is something we're generally not using. Mainly it was used by CDBG, and since they are typically not using CAPES these days, you'll notice that program jurisdiction usually isn't even set up for programs. And you'll see application status that will end up defaulting to active. Lastly, the application number, and this is specifically the CAPES application number, that will auto-generate after you click submit. So easy enough to get going on this one. We enter the date using, I would encourage either a 6 or an 8-digit date, but you could also click the calendars to select the date. And then I like to tab over when we're in screen, so you can tab right over and enter the time. Timestamp standards may differ based on programs. I've seen 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock used typically. Again, if you're not sure what time to record, check in with your manager or the program manager. We generally skip over program jurisdiction. This is a way that we can indicate the representative responsibility. This is something that if it's being used, it's typically set up by city or county. For jurisdiction representative, we want to indicate our PDI rep here. If that PDI rep is not in the drop-down list, either let them know so they can submit a ticket to SolarWinds, in SolarWinds to the application support unit, or you can let us know, submit a ticket in SolarWinds, let us know the program, let us know who it is that's missing. I mentioned application status, that'll default. You'll notice that it's blank initially and will default to active after you click submit. Once you click submit that first time, you'll notice active is the default. There are other application statuses. They won't matter so much at this point, but just to give you an idea about those, active means it's received and under review. An application that goes into award and into a pending contract and ultimately into an executed contract, the application status will always remain active. Canceled is one we use if we received it and for whatever reason it was canceled by HCD prior to making an award. Disencumbered award means that HCD did attempt to award it, and for whatever reason, the applicant decided to decline the award. So after the award was made, but before we actually executed a contract. Qualified, the application itself did not meet our qualifications. Not funded, as you move along in the application timeline. You may end up changing applications over to not funded. So these are ones that after we evaluate them, we determine we are not going to award them. Rejected is currently being used for any applications that are received after the due date closes. And then returning is very specific. It's only used by PLHA. It's something unique to their program and a way that they do their contracts. So if it's for PLHA, this is specifically a contract in years 2 through 5. And lastly, we have withdrawn, and this is an action taken by the applicant. They let us know for whatever reason they're withdrawing their application, and that occurs prior to us determining an award. So again, not something you'll be changing at the application entry stage, but just good to understand these. So going back to our general info screen, we have an application received date and time. This is required. We'll want to set up that jurisdiction representative with our PDI rep, and we'll do our first submit to save because submit is the save button in CAPES. If needed, this is a good point to record the application number. Keep in mind, this is the CAPES application number, not the FAST application number. But if for some reason you're entering a bunch of applications and not doing much more than this, definitely really important to record the application number now. I would highly encourage at least getting general info and parties entered. So there is more than just the application number to record it on, and you can make sure you're not accidentally duplicating anything. But at a minimum, make sure you're recording that application number. All right, so at this time, I'm going to take you over into CAPES UAT. All right, so let's take you over into CAPES UAT. And I know Angela was working furiously setting everyone
Yep.
up. So
Everyone's good to go.
fantastic. Thanks, Angela. Sorry.
No problem. Okay.
So everyone should be set up. It'll be your same CAPES username. If you do not already have CAPES access, it will be your first initial and last name. So for me, mine is S. Pumpkins. And then the password for you guys, unless you've previously gone in to CAPES UAT before, if it's brand new for you, your password is going to be password1. So that's the word password. P is lowercase and just the number 1. So I do encourage you to go along with us. And for most of you, if you haven't been in here before, it'll probably want you to set a new password. And we'll get going. We're actually going to jump over to that NOFA screen. For the purposes of today's training, you've been set up with access for application entry and parties admins. As long as up here in the URL, it says CAPES UAT, it's fine. So basically it allows anything you enter here should be good. Yeah, Tanya, your password probably will
I'm
match your Kate.
I'm
Normal.
I'm sorry. Can you drop that in the chat one more time? It's not showing on my end and I didn't have it saved from a previous training. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you.
No
I
worries.
appreciate you
Yeah.
guys.
If yes. One of the new things with us running our trainings out of HCD Learns is that if you haven't jumped in and we drop it into the chat, you'll miss it. So thank you for that reminder. I did knock it over early. All right, so assuming everyone has gotten in here, the best way to go is going over to the NOFA screen and everyone is set up for access, regardless of your actual programs. Everyone has access for Accelerator, that's ACC, or Home Key, that's HK. I think I will pick on Home Key today. So I'm just going to prop that program short name in and do a quick search. And all right, all right. So once you get here, you'll notice we've got an open name link. Tanya, for you, use your normal CAPES username and password. Oh, you know what? Hold on. That's because I was in the middle of CAPES UAT, Tanya, that's why. All right. Okay, so tracking there again, I'm going to go to Hemkey. Fantastic. I like to use HomeKey and Accelerator right now because they don't have a lot of NOFAs, so I can just search on those and there's minimal ones. So we click the NOFA name link. You notice we already have a number of applications. That's okay. What we're going to do is click Add Application on the side here. And it starts us off in general info. Just wanted to let you guys know, you'll notice on the side, these, when they're in green on the side, we tend to call these the wizards, specifically for application entry. Once we get the general info screen done, you'll notice these links do activate. Strongly encourage that you go screen by screen through the application to ensure we don't miss any data. But you can jump around. Just keep in mind, if you enter any data and do not click submit, it will not save it for you. We do not have autosave features like we would in Word or Excel. So in terms of our receipt date and time, you can either click your calendar to choose a date. CAPES is set up with what we call data masking. So you can either write the 6-digit date, so today month, today, or today month, today day, today year, or 8-digit, today month, today date, 4-digit year without the slashes. CAPES will update for you. So you'll notice we've got slashes here, and I like to tab around on the screens. You can use tab and shift tab to move around. So you'll notice CAPES actually updated to the full date. I'm going to use 4 o'clock. So you'll also notice you can just start typing. CAPES will fill things in. If you use Alt and your down arrow, you can also get to your list. You'll notice that that will change your selection. Program jurisdiction, you'll notice that we don't have anything to select here. So we get to skip that over that. And then again, data doesn't matter as long as CAPES will accept it at this point because we're in UAT. So feel free to choose anyone on the list. And I'm going to click submit. You'll notice that up here in the breadcrumbs, we now actually have an application number showing. And when I click submit, CAPES took us to the next screen, which is parties. You'll notice these all are active. I could jump around if needed, but again, it's just better to go straight through to make sure that we don't miss any data. I just want to take you back into general info so that you can see now. You'll notice that application status is active. All right, and you'll notice up here, our application status is active as well. All right, let's go back to that slide deck. All right, so parties. There are two places in application entry that will be entering parties. The parties we need to enter will differ slightly, but for the first parties screen, we are entering here our primary applicant. That is the entity or organization who submitted the application. If the application lists more than one entity or organization, we want to list every one of them. So if there are any co-applicants, we have the option to do that. For each applicant, we want the authorized representative, that's the person with signing authority, and the applicant contact. That is the individual for each applicant who will actually respond to us. As you probably know, especially in larger organizations, the person with the signing authority may not be the person who most readily responds to us. So we can list we have the option to list both of them. Make sure you're listing both of them, even if it's the same person. We'll talk about a trick to doing that if it's the same person and making your life a little easier. On this particular party screen, we also want to list our HCD representative. This is our PDI rep. And know that the work that we do here, this actually will populate to the standard agreement screen, assuming that we decide to make an award and we're taking it into a pending contract. So the data entered here does pull over both the primary applicant and any co-applicant. So it just helps us out. Doesn't mean that we can't change it if we realize that the applicant or the primary applicant really is not our primary contractor, but it does pull over and help us out. So to get started, we first need to say what type of party we're adding. We should always start with our primary applicant. So select it from our drop-down list and then click the Associate New Party button. This is the first of many times we will get the party search screen. So again, a party is any entity, individual, or organization in CAPES. And the wild card is the wild card is an asterisk in CAPES. So make sure that you're using it to do some good searching techniques. Just a review of using the wildcard when we're searching. Where you place it will give us different results. Yes, this is going to be in a search screen, but just to give you some ideas, if you put your wildcard before, keep in mind wherever you put the wildcard, it is replacing what we don't know or aren't sure about. So if it's before, all of our results will end with that term or number sequence. If you're placing it after, everything will begin with the term or number sequence. You could use a single keyword or a single phrase, and everything, if you put the asterisk on the beginning and the end, your search results will have the term anywhere. And you can also use it with a set of keywords. You'll notice we have an asterisk, but no space between housing and Los Angeles. So that gives us everything that has both housing and Los Angeles in the results. When we get our search results for parties, assuming we get search results, make sure that you're taking a look through before selecting one or determining that you need to add it. Some things to take a look at is whether the vendor ID, the supplier ID information is already known. Really important, making sure that our mailing and physical addresses not only are entered, but actually match exactly with what is given in the application. This means down to suite numbers, down to zip codes. And I strongly encourage, if possible, and it's the correct one, choosing one with an email address. Of course, all this being said, keep in mind that if you don't find something that matches exactly, a new party may need to be added. Um, While we don't like to have duplicates in the system, and you will find we have duplicates in CAPES, anytime you choose to edit a party record, it will affect everywhere in CAPES that that party is linked. So if you're told a certain contractor has moved to a different suite number and you change that record in CAPES, it will change it everywhere, including any active contract, whether that's correct or not. So if in doubt, definitely ask whether you're not sure if you should be adding a new party or editing. When you review those party records, if assuming you find the one you need, you will want to select the radio button and then click that select party button. Or if you've determined you need to add a new one, you'll find add party is at the top of that search for top right of the search for party section. Of course, if you have any questions about the party table entry process, we have a PDF for that. In terms of parties at this stage of the game, here are the parties we at a minimum want listed, although we'd definitely encourage listing all of them. We need to make sure our primary applicant is listed there. And yes, we are very specific about needing a primary applicant. You will find applicant in the drop-down list. Please don't use that one. CAPES won't accept that in lieu of a primary applicant. So make sure it's primary applicant. And if there are any co-applicants, for each applicant listed, make sure we have our authorized representative and applicant contact. And finally, we want our HCD representative on this list. After you've done all of that good work, you'll click Submit to save. So if we go back to our UAT experience here, you'll notice that when I save into parties, you'll notice my HCD representative is already listed. So that's fantastic. That's a little bit of work I don't have to do already. So it's just one thing off our list. So if we want to get started here, I know I mentioned applicant. Basically, wipe this out of your brain. Make sure you're always starting with your primary applicant. So select that in the list and click Associate New Party. Again, we're in UAT, so anything that you do is fine. I just like to use self-help as a good example of both using our asterisks and keywords, and also to demonstrate what I was talking about. We know that there are duplicates, and it can be difficult to keep an eye on and make sure that we're choosing the correct one. But you'll notice we have a lot with these same addresses, sometimes even the same email addresses, but there's also different ways that it's been entered, with the asterisk, with or without the hyphen. You'll also notice the same thing down here for self-help enterprises. So keep an eye out. Try to do a good job of selecting it. Ideally, if we're choosing one that has, you can't see, we lose the vendor ID, all of these. If it's a known contractor and it's the same one, everything matches down the line. Ideally, we want one that has all of the data in there, just makes life easier for others as we move along. So we have our primary applicant, and then because I want to show you a trick here, for each applicant, we want our authorized representative and applicant contact. You can choose what order to do it. I would go authorized rep and then applicant contact, but that's up to you. Just want to show you a trick. Once we get you'll notice our authorized representative shows here. If you are lucky enough and your authorized representative and your applicant contact are the same person, You don't have to worry about trying to select the same record. You can actually set up applicant contact. This is the new relation type we're adding. If this is the same person, you click this same as drop-down list, you'll notice that we have Tom Colashaw, who is our authorized representative for our primary applicant. If we set this up, click associate new party, we do not have to go through the search for party screen. It's going to add the exact same party entity. So if your authorized representative, your applicant contact are the same person, you can use this trick to streamline your process just a little bit. So now that we're going to say this is the minimum that we need. I'm going to click submit and it'll take us into our activity screen. Right. So getting into activity and then allocation, this is where we get to start actually talking about funding. Specifically, activity is how we record the funds that are being requested based on the ways that they anticipate spending the money. So on this screen, when we're recording it, for each activity that funding is being requested, we of course enter that requested amount. These activities are listed at the program level and then associated to the NOFA when ASU adds the NOFA in. You'll see activity attributes. This is another legacy from CDBG, so we're not currently using this. Don't worry about it. Depending on the program, you may have one or a small number or quite a few activities. Whatever it is in your application document, you will find a listing of the funding being requested by activity. When there are similar looking activities, make sure to try to match those up. It's possible that the application may not have the activities in the same order that they're shown in CAPES. So just try to keep an eye on that, make sure that everything is matching up. Of course, once you enter all of that data, double check it, click submit to save. And you won't notice it because CAPES will take you to the allocation screen, but that total amount requested will actually update after you click submit. You won't notice it updating while you're there. So speaking of allocations, this is looking at the requested funding based on the bucket of money that it is being pulled from. So essentially how the funding is coming into HCD. So here, similar to activities, we'll be entering the amount for the requested amount for each allocation as required. And it is important to double check your activity and allocation amounts, especially if it's split across activities and split across allocations. The totals for activity and allocation will need to match. Similar to activities, allocations are listed higher up. This is actually something that's taken care of also by ASU and is associated at the NOFA level. For both activities and allocations, you'll notice that you may not be entering data in all of the columns and lines, so just keep an eye out for that. And of course, if you're not sure what allocations are being used, check with your manager or check with FMO. So here, you'll notice MHP for this particular one. It's pretty easy. It's a simple allocation. Depending on the programs, you may see that there are a lot of allocation lines. We name them very distinctly these days. So we tend to use the program years and other things to note them out. So just keep an eye on that. And just another reminder that no matter how many allocation lines are being used, The total allocation amount and your total activity amount will have to match to click submit and go forward here. So let's show you this in action. One of the reasons I like to show home key is you'll notice that there are a lot of different activities here. The one thing that can trip people up is 1 and 1A look very similar. You'll notice that they are different in that 1 is acquisition or rehabilitation, 1A is acquisition and rehabilitation. So it's possible an application could be requesting money for both of those activities. Um, but if it's only one, make sure you're double checking which of those it is. So here again, we're in CAPES UAT. So whatever we enter is fine. And I just like to tab on through rather than using my mouse to move around. You'll notice as I'm tabbing, our total amount requested doesn't update, but we'll click submit and it'll take us into allocation. We've got our total listed here. So this is a good example. You'll notice that we have 4 different allocation options here, but you'll notice that 2 of them are linked to the 2021-22 fiscal year. 2 are listed to the 2022-23 fiscal year. You'll notice in each of those, we have 1 for general fund, we have 1 for ARPA local assistance. So just keeping an eye out. Of course, if something goes wrong, you accidentally miss enter, that's okay. It is all changeable. I haven't seen a mistake that can't be fixed. If you can't fix it for some reason, just get us a ticket in SolarWinds and we'll be happy to help you out. I'm going to make my life easy. And just use a single allocation line here. Just to show you, so I mentioned it has to match up. If I try to do a dollar amount more than our total and I click submit, you'll notice that CAPES doesn't let me go forward. This is a clue. If you ever click submit and CAPES doesn't take you to the next screen or it doesn't seem to be saving your data, try it again and always take a look in the upper left corner. CAPES should be telling you something. Whether it's a validation error like this one where they need to match up, or maybe you're missing data. Always keep an eye out for that. If you can't get past something, again, ticket in SolarWinds will help you get through. All right, so we've saved the money that's being requested. And let's move on. An area of the application that you'll probably use less often, but we do want you to be familiar with it, is program income activity. More typically for federal programs, program income activity is actually when we expect money to be generated by a project.
It won't go away.
Oh, was that a question or?
Oh,
Okay,
no.
great. Great. All right, so program income activity. So when we're entering it, similar to the activity screen, you'll get a list of all the activities. Should you need to record program income activity, and this is data that would be in the application, for each activity, we can record an expected income amount. Again, this is something that you typically won't be using. And if you don't need to record it at this point when you're doing application entry, just click submit and that'll take you to projects. If you're following along on this slide deck and don't need to enter program income activity, click that projects link, it'll jump you right to that section. But just to make sure that you have an idea of what's going on here, if you ever click that add activity link in this screen, You'll notice you have a drop-down list, and this is all of the activities, again, that are set up for the program. So if we're getting money generated by a program, we'll click the activity and then the add selected activity button. And it's pretty simple here. If we're if we're generating money by uh, f- through a number of different activities, you can actually add all of the activities in and then add the expected or proposed amount to come in, or you can add them singly. So once you add those in, you just click submit to save. It'll take you back to the main program income activities screen. You'll notice this is just showing you those. You can, of course, add more if needed, but if not, once you're done with it, click submit and we'll get into projects. So here, projects has a number of different areas. It's going to be one of the places that you spend the most time when you're doing application entry. So we have the main project screen. We have rent and unit mix and target population. To get all of that started, you actually have to click the add project link. And you'll notice on this main project screen, we have 7 different sections. So these are all collapsed down so you can see them. Some of them you may not use. You'll notice as we go through, we actually don't use risk analysis at all at the moment. But when we get started, at a minimum, we have some required fields in the project location box. So in order to save this project, we need to provide the project name, the actual address of the project. If the given address is a PO box, it is okay to list it. We'll talk about some complications with that. We indicate the origination type. You'll have a number of options, but specifically we'll be choosing independent at this stage. Not technically a required field, but because it's something that we're really tracking on, we have an area type, so we can indicate whether it's northern or southern, rural or urban, one of those 4. We also indicate the project or program type. So whether this is an other owner or rental. And we'll talk about being able to mark project addresses as confidential. So starting at the top, we have a required field, and that is the project name. Please make sure that we are not using all caps, proper capitalization only here. If you're using tab and shift tab to move through, you'll notice that the next place you jump to is origination type. This is a drop-down list. You do have all 3 as options, but please just select independent at this stage of application entry. The other 2, master and individual, these are typically used after we've made an award and an executed contract. It allows us to actually have multiple projects in under a contract. So at application stage, we don't need to do that. Just choose the origination type independent. When we enter the address, CAPES has some tricks for you here. I strongly recommend just entering the street address, or if we have to, the PO box, and then actually jumping down to the zip code box. If you do that, CAPES will actually update your city, county, and state for you. So you'll notice here, city, county, and state. Of course, state, generally speaking, for an application and project location, state should be California for 99.5% of our project. sort of new to CAPES, and this is why I make the big note about PO boxes. As long as the street address is a valid street address or street address range, CAPES will do some of your later work in application entry for you, specifically importing the legislative data, so who are our state senators, representatives, etc. So in order to make that work, we need to have a valid USPS valid street address or street address range. And that is based on the project address and our zip code. After you've entered the project address and the zip code, and that is all correct, after and only after all of that is entered, if we've been asked to keep the project location confidential, this is the time that you would click the confidential box. When you click it, CAPES will update the project address and it'll show as confidential in all caps. What this means is then CAPES will not include that address, specifically the address, not just the project will be included, but indicated by the city, county, and state, but the specific location will not be included in reports distributed outside of or external to HCD. Really strongly encourage, if you're asked to do confidential, please make sure that you actually fill in the project address properly and then choose the confidential check mark box. The reason being is if you just write confidential in the project address, well, one, you'll have to do the work for legislative. Two, if you do that, we will never be able to search on this project based on the address. And that is a prime way that we get public records access requests. So when people are asking, hey, do we have a project at this location? We search by address. So if all we have written in there is confidential, that makes the work to do that research much more difficult. Also skews our internal reporting. All right. Getting off the soapbox for using the proper use of the confidential checkbox. When we've got our address done, we can indicate that area type. Again, this is not a required field, but I'd strongly encourage filling it out because this is something that we do look at. Um, Lesser used, you'll notice we have a checkbox to the right of the zip code if to indicate that this is an unincorporated address. And lastly, we have the project program type drop-down list. This, like other data, will be in the application, but this is the point that we can indicate whether it's an owner, or a rental. Associate jurisdiction, we don't use this. If you go and click on it, you'll probably get this message from CAPES because jurisdiction is not set up for the vast majority of our programs. If it has been set up, then you'll get a list that looks like this that you'll then be able to search either by the type and or by jurisdiction name. Should you need to add this in when you're searching, this is a radio button, so you can only choose one and then click submit if needed. But you'll find that this is something that we are not typically employing at the moment. Moving down in projects, the next box down is the parties box. This is the second time that we do parties in the application entry phase. It's really important not only to fill in the projects screen on the second one in the application itself, but very important to make sure that we get this parties box set up as well, as it helps down the line. In this one, technically none of the fields are required, but what we're looking to get set up here is our borrower or payee. We want to indicate our PDI rep and manager here, loan closing rep and manager, and any other project party that's listed that is on the application. Let's get these in here. And one plug is that when you add HCD staff in at this point, this helps make sure that show up on their or your overview screen so they can be sure to be tracking on those applications or the contract or project as we go along the way. If we don't know it at initial entry, of course, let's get this entered as soon as possible. It just helps everyone work a little bit more efficiently. So similar to other areas where we add parties, we've got a drop-down list. You'll notice this list is going to be much larger than the other one. So select your party type. I usually recommend starting with your borrower or payee. You click the associate party. We'll of course go through all of our good searching methods using our wildcards, double checking all the data to see if we can use an existing party before we decide that we have to add one. Another plug for that. So here you see a nicely filled out parties box. So we're using things we want to encourage you to use our loan closing rep and manager, if applicable, our NOFA rep and manager, our PDI rep and manager. So be sure that you're listing HCD employees in those boxes. Moving down, our third box on the project screen is the HCD multi-funded program / contract box. Depending on the program, you may not need to do this. This is something that won't be needed if it's coming through a supernova family. But you'll notice, especially if you're entering for accelerator, you will be using this box. So this is where we record and link up applications that are being funded by more than one HCD program. To do that, we click the link to add HCD multi-funded project. And here's where it's really important that we're entering our project names accurately. Definitely encourage using a wildcard. Specific to this search screen, you'll notice that instead of radio buttons, we do have checkboxes. That allows you to select multiple program or multiple projects if appropriate. So select as many as are appropriate in your search results and then select projects to associate them. So you can see here, we have a MHP that also is getting funding from NPLH. Moving down, we have a box called Project Sites. This is one that may not be used as much, and really want to emphasize that this is only for applications where we have multiple project sites. So what do I mean by that? Here, we are going to have a specific and distinct site name this is going to be different than our project name. We're going to have a different and distinct address. This is not the same as our project address. If this matches your project address, then we don't need to fill in project sites. We just leave this box as it is. We don't add a new one. Project sites is only to record when we have applications that have different project sites, so distinct and different addresses. Should you need to add that, We click the link for Add Project Site. Site name, similar to project name, we'll want to use proper capitalization. Again, this address, I'll recommend entering the distinct different street address and entering the zip code to let CAPES do the work for city and county. After that's all done, if this needs to be confidential, at that point, you would use the confidential checkbox and then submit to save. Risk analysis, good news, we get to skip over this one. So we are not currently using it. You don't have to worry about it. If we do begin using it, rest assured we will provide a training specific to that screen. Almost to the end of this screen, we have the market information box. So this helps us track the market and projected rent. For this one, this is particular to projects that have units. So you'll notice our unit sizes here. We have 0, 1 through 4, and 5 or greater. For each of those, as applicable in data found in the application, you'll enter the market rent, that's the going rate for each unit size, and then the projected maximum rent for each unit size. CAPES will actually update those, so good news, you don't have to do that math. Last but not least, we have the activity information box. This is fairly simple, but a very important thing. It is not necessarily a required field, but you should consider this a required field when you're entering project data. So all you need to do is enter the requested amount, and good news, it should always match your application activity amount, which is that second column there. So just let CAPES tell you the details, enter it, and click submit. At this point, you keep going with projects because it will take you into the rent and unit mix screen. So rent and unit mix, of course, is how we can track planned units for those programs that have rent and unit mix. This data is included in the application document. Again, if you have trouble reading or deciphering it, make sure to check with your manager or the program manager. So on the rent and unit mix screen, we actually have two sections. We have a utility allowance section. We'll enter that separately. And then in the rent and unit mix tables, we have a number of different required fields. So when we're recording units, we must indicate whether it's restricted or unrestricted. We need to indicate our income limit, the unit size. So essentially how many bedrooms. We have some additional options, efficiency, SRO, and studio. How many of those particular units, so this mix of income limit, unit type, and bedroom unit size, how many of those units are projected to be made? And then we have required the maximum gross rent and the proposed net rent. We have other fields that are not necessarily required, but are strongly encouraged that we fill out if we have this data. So that actually begins with the program. Very key when you're recording an application for a supernova grouping. Indicate the program. When we are projecting for assisted units, we want a count for each unit type. If it's a manager unit, we need to indicate how many of those units how many of the manager units are there going to be. And you'll notice on the far right, we have targets. We can select up to 5 targets. And for each of those targets, how many of the units in each row will satisfy that target or projected to satisfy that target. Of course, always refer back to that rent and unit mix table. To get started, you'll notice in utility allowance, we again have each of our bedroom sizes here, and you'll notice we have a separate submit button. For this one, when you click submit, it will not take you to the next screen, but it's very important that you click submit here once you enter your utility allowance data. If you don't click submit and then you go on to the rent unit mix table, that will actually wipe out your data entry. So whenever CAPES gives you a separate submit button on a screen, make sure that you click submit to save the data there. Lower down, we have the unit summary, and this will populate as we add our restricted units, unrestricted units, and any manager's unit. You'll notice each of those has their own summary tables. To get started with any of those, we have one add units link, and you'll notice we get 5 rows available. So there's a few things. If you know that you're going to have more than 5 unit types in here, you can click add more. You'll get 5 lines each time, or you could do them 5 at a time, add more when you need to. Either way, when we get started, again, strongly encourage selecting program from that drop-down list, even though it's not a required field at this point. You will have to indicate our unit type. So is this a restricted or unrestricted unit? Income limit, this is a very long list. And definitely you want to keep an eye out. If we're doing a percentage, make sure that you're double checking, is this SMI or AMI? Unit size, so these are our bedroom sizes or efficiency SRO and studio. For that mix of unit type, income limit, and unit size, how many units are projected? Are any of them assisted? Are any of these going to be manager's units? Again, those 2 fields, they're not required because they are not always entered. But of course, if we have that data, we need to fill it in. For maximum gross rent and proposed net rent, these 2 are required fields. And then you'll notice our targets at the end here. You can actually get your targets set up before you start doing any of your data entry. I like to recommend that. That way you can just tab down the line and enter the data. But to slow you'll notice some of them are going to be matched with programs, but not all of them. And you can select up to 5 targets. Of course, as you're entering each mixture of unit type, income limit, and unit size, you would want to record for any targets that are being tracked. So more typically, you'll have to add more lines. You'll notice there's a lot of variations here. Sometimes it's the same unit size, but different percentages. So just keep an eye out on that. You'll notice in this one, we have a manager's unit. Sometimes those are restricted, sometimes they'll be unrestricted, but make sure that you record those manager's units by selecting both the income limit and indicating it in the manager's units column. I'll show you when we get going. And after you do all of that work, you'll want to click submit to save. And I definitely encourage that you go back and double check your unit summary. Be sure that everything saves. If something's off, you can take a look at the specific ones to see if you can track down what's missing before you go back in. Anytime you need to go back in and update, add more units, make a correction, it's always going to be by clicking that add units link. Assuming everything's correct, we click submit to save, and we'll end this section by taking a look at the target population screen. So in this screen, we can enter target population. We can indicate regulated and non-regulated target populations. You'll notice that some of the data in the top will actually populate from that rent and unit mix screen data. And because we do not have a separate submit button here, I usually recommend doing your regulated and non-regulated target populations first, and then going back to the top. Lastly, we have two abbreviations: supportive housing households is SH, special needs population household is SNP. So again, I recommend getting started with regulated and non-regulated. So to do regulated, we have a link. And if we're adding these, we do have some required fields. In regulated, we'll have a target type and have to indicate a target population. We set those up and click submit, add more if needed. For non-regulated, we have a target population, and you'll notice that we indicate a number of units. Again, we click submit and it's update. Assuming you do regulated and non-regulated first, then you'll go back up to the target population box here. So you'll notice on the left-hand side, for this particular one, in the rent unit mix, we had two different targets, and you'll notice that the targets are listed and then the percent of total units is calculated by CAPES. And then what we do fill in on this area is the number of supportive housing households, assuming there are any, and the number of special needs population households. The end of that, we'll click submit to save. So after all that fun stretch here, we'll go back into CAPES UAT. And because we were out for a little bit, let's go back in. I'm just going to find it by going back to our NOFA. Okay. All right. So this dropped us out here. We were last in program income activity. We get to move past that. So key thing to know when you're entering project information, if for some reason you're not going to enter all of it, at a minimum, you need to complete the project location box data before you submit. If you don't and you jump out of it, either you click cancel and go back out, or you click one of the other links, that won't save. So in order to make sure that your project continues existing, you need to enter the whole thing here. Let's see. You'll notice I tab over, we get to origination type. Make your life easy, just choose the first one, which is independent. Um, and I'm just going to type in a zip code. You'll notice when I tab over, CAPES updates this for me. We'll want to indicate our area type. And we do need a project program type. I would actually recommend that at this point, especially if you might be jumping back out, it's always a good idea. It might just be easy enough to save. So submit at that point. You'll notice that it jumps you into Rent and Unit Mix. If you jump back and click on projects, you'll click back into the project. If you click cancel, it'll actually reverse one screen. So it'll take you back into this add edit project detail. So we definitely want to make sure that we are adding our project parties, even though they are not required. So for me, I'm going to go with our borrower. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to leave it at that. Of course, when you're doing application entry, you'll want to fill this out fully. Be sure to use that parties, all the party data that's provided in the application. Or if you need to indicate a multi funding from other HCD projects, just give you an example. Usually best to search by the project name to make sure that we're looking at the right one. You'll notice if I go just as simple as estates, we have a lot of them. But just to give you an example, this is something that we do still use, even when we're looking at, even in the age of doing supernofas. So if we would do that. Project sites, just as a reminder that if the address you enter here matches the project location box address, there is no need to fill in the project site. This should be a separate and distinct address. It should never match your project address here. Risk analysis, again, we get to skip over that because we're not using it right now. Market information, this is where we're indicating our market rent. So assuming we're only doing 2 different sizes of units, our market rent is, of course, the going rate. And then the maximum project rent. So this is what they anticipate will be the maximum rent for the project. And then last but not least on this particular screen is activity information. So you'll see that CAPES gives this to us here. So we can go ahead and just enter off what CAPES is telling us. And we'll click submit again. It'll tell us it updated it and it'll take us here. Just to give you an example, I mentioned you want to be sure that you're clicking submit here. If we just enter this, we don't click submit and we go to add unit. Just a quick thing, I'm going to go back out. You'll notice my data did not save. So make sure, again, if you're entering data in utility allowance, click that submit button. Make sure that you're saving it. Then we go into our unit. One thing I like to make a point about is if we have a manager's unit, make sure that we're also filling in this manager's units column. I'm going to leave it blank so I can show you why, just to make sure that it's showing up in the right way. Yes, it is possible to list a $0 for rent. That's not unusual for the manager's units. Just make sure that you're you're recording the data that's in there. Give it a couple more unit types. Again, keep in mind that you're checking, is it listing AMI or SMI? Because that does make a difference, of course. one more type in just to give you just to see. Of course, I'm just making up this data. You'll want to make sure that you're working along with it. If I wanted, I could add more here, but for now, go ahead and submit. So just want to show you so you can, of course, double check your totals of units, restricted, assisted. You'll want to double check your monthly rents. Are those all calculating up together? You can take a look. So I collapsed down our restricted units. You can come in and take a look. This basically mirrors your lines. So come in and take a look. You'll notice that it does separate out income limit. If this had been, so we have 35% of AMI, but if we had 35% of AMI and then, unit size 1, unit size 2, they'll be all grouped together. You'll notice we've got our manager's unit showing here, but in our manager's unit down here, it's not showing up. The reason why is we did not indicate that this is a manager's unit. It's just, I'm going to make some changes just so you can see how this actually shows up together. So I'm just making a few changes. We'll take a look at this. So you'll notice one of the changes I made was I made sure that this time I indicated how many units of these managers units are managers units in the column. You'll notice now it shows up in managers units. I could use that link to go back in. You'll notice that I changed my 45% AMI to 35%. I just want you to see when you have repeating AMI or repeating income limit. So same percentage AMI or SMI. The different unit sizes will show in line here. CAPES will group these together. So just keep an eye on that. And of course, those are blue links, so it'll take you right back into your unit. So moving down, assuming everything matches up here, you'll notice our target populations show up here. When we click submit, you'll notice again, our target populations are showing up here. How many total units of all of the units that there are, how many are percentage. We don't have a separate submit button here. So if I enter anything and then go to add my regulated or non-regulated, you'll notice it wiped this data out. So my recommendation to you, always add your regulated and non-regulated first. And then go back up to the top before you click submit. So that will take us into proposed funding source. This is an important one, getting a little more attention. So funding sources, this is where we record all of the expected project funds, not only what HCD is kicking in, but what is being kicked in by any other state agency, and also outside money. So for each funding source, we have to indicate the name, and that will mean that we will be associating a party. We need to indicate what type of funding, how much that proposed funding is. So you'll notice that in addition you'll notice that the funding comes in for what is set up at activity, but we can record additional funding from other HCD programs. And we really encourage, as tempting as it may be to jump over this section, this plays into financing and underwriting review. So we really encourage that this is fully populated in before it hits underwriting phase. So how we get this done, you'll notice that the funding actually comes in from that project activity. And then we get to add for each specific activity. It'll take us to here. If we're recording funding from another HCD program here, you'll get to choose it from the drop-down list. If the funding is coming from a non-HCD program, another state entity program, then we would list it here. Whether it's an HCD program, another state entity program, or an outside source altogether, we need to click Associate Source and search for it using good party searching habits. It's just a reminder about doing our good searching. Depending on the source name and whether it's indicated as a HCD program or not, you may have the option or maybe will want to indicate the source code. Depending on what is at the top of this screen, you may not need to do anything. The source code drop-down list may not exist. We have an opportunity to record the purpose. This is a free entry area. We have the opportunity to record what type of entity this is coming from. You are required to indicate the funding type. Is this construction, permanent, or pre-development funding? And we, of course, need to say how much that funding is proposed at. If this is a loan, please be sure you're entering the lien position as provided on the application. This is really important in terms of it getting listed and us evaluating things. If we have a commitment date, we can enter that. Of course, if this is a loan, make sure that we are recording that loan term in months or years. And last but not least on this screen, in addition to purpose, we can also enter comments if needed. So you'll want to record all of the funding sources. One thing to keep an eye out for, especially when there's multiple activities, if it's not clear whether it's being spread out among multiple activities, again, check with your manager or the program manager. You may either be directed to split it out between the different activities or record everything under a single activity. Regardless of that, once you finish all of the funding, we'll click Submit and Save. So I mentioned multiple activities. You'll notice particular on this screen, we have an add link for each activity. When I add data here, this is specific to this activity. So if funding is specific to it, if outside funding is specific to a particular activity, make sure that we are recording it that way. You'll notice when we come in here, it automatically starts the other program. If I go backwards, you'll notice this drop-down list is different HCD programs. If I choose HCD programs, you'll notice my source code, that drop-down list disappears. If this is going to be from another program, non-HCD, we would record it here. But typically, we're going to be recording outside sources. So I'm just going to choose. Sometimes when we get it in the application documents, those vendors aren't yet identified. We do have ways to record that, such as like private mortgage, deferred costs. As soon as we have that data, solidified, we want to update it in CAPES, but we do have some sort of generic options to record it and get it started. We can skip purpose if need be. Source entity, again, we don't, if we have that data, we of course want to fill it in, keeping in mind the more data we have here, the better it helps. Don't forget lean position. If we don't have a lean position, double check with your manager or the program manager. 99 is often used as a default to push it to the bottom of the list. Typically speaking, HCD is going to be lean position 0. That puts us at the top. We have a committed date, we can fill that in. We'll get our loan term in here. I'll click submit. So you'll notice when this pops up, we've got a lean position of 99. It puts it below HCD. You'll notice that this is specific here. And one thing to double check as you're entering this, when you're looking at your funding details in the application, ultimately we want that total proposed amount to match up, not just the HCD funding, but all of the anticipated funding. So we'll click submit. And that'll take us into the demographics custom field breakdown. You'll notice for this one, we do not have any data. So I'm just going to click submit and jump us ahead. But let's talk about demographics custom field. So this is set up at the program level and then associated to NOFAs. So if this is set up, you may not be entering this data at the initial application phase, but we definitely want to enter it as available. And you'll notice if it's set up, we actually have a number of different fields and your answers are going to depend. So we have fields that might request a date, a dollar amount, maybe a drop-down list, maybe a number. Typically speaking, when it's a number of units. And some of them are even a text field, and that can be character limited. Of course, again, this is all set up at the program level and then associated to the NOFA as requested. So you can see MHP does have these fields used. They track different things here. They have some application demographics. They have some project tracker activities. If you're doing this, you just click a link to get in there. So here's some examples that you may see. Again, I mentioned number. This is often a unit count. So again, some fields asking for units. But for this one, you'll notice it's a lot of drop-down lists. These are set up. So you'll see different answers here, but you'll notice the sizes of the drop-down list change. That's just indicating the answers. Maybe yes, no, maybe yes, no, not available, not applicable. Yeah, so it will change. The good news is you shouldn't be left wondering what kind of answer you'll be giving because it always indicated to the left of the fill-in field. You'll notice these also are not, none of these fields are required. That's because sometimes when you're filling this data in, you may only fill in 1 or 2 fields at a time. You need to be able to get in, enter your data, save, and get out. You'll fill in the rest at a later point. Of course, for the data that we have, every time you go in there, make sure you're filling it out before you click submit to save. And to access each of those separate groups, just click the link in the middle. Assuming you've been filling these out, you'll click submit to save. Or if you don't have any, such as with HomeKey, just click submit to save and it'll take you into legislative data. Generally speaking, with legislative data, these days you will only want to double check and make sure that this is accurate. CAPES should show you a congressional district, state assembly, and state senate. as long as um, as long as we get a street address, we should get this auto-populated if it's a valid USPS street address or street address range. We have a link up with a different system that populates it in. This is the one place where having a PO box as your project address is going to mean that you have a little bit more work to do. And you'll notice that sometimes, depending on the address, you may see multiple legislators. That may not, that may be correct. Just double check and make sure it's accurate. If you ever need to change it or you find that this did not populate as it should, click the Associate Legislator link. You want to search. So start out your search by indicating the legislator type. And then I would definitely use wildcards. If you're doing a district number, we generally recommend the district number with the wildcard in front. You can also search by legislator name. This is one place you'll notice that depending on what you search, how you search, if you get multiple results, you actually can get checkboxes. So rather than radio buttons, you have checkboxes. That's because you may need to select more than one. For all correct answers, mark the checkbox under select, and then very important, make sure that you're updating the associate with drop-down list. This should match your project name, not application. Once you get those two things set up, you can click Submit to save and repeat if needed. So because I used a fake address, you'll notice it didn't pull in here, but that's good because it gives us a chance to search. Here, let's just search on that. So you may know, moved districts. Just want to show, you'll notice we've got check marks here. So whether we want to select both or just one, you really make sure, please make sure that you update this associate with before you click submit. Why does it matter? You'll notice if I go in and remove that, let's say I do this again. Say I just associate it with the application. You'll notice it says associated with application. We don't want that there. Make sure that it says associated with whatever your project name happens to be. Assuming you have to do any updates here or everything checks out and you're ready to go, click submit. And that'll take us into the last, or technically second to last screen here. That is our application contact comment log. Very important one. Keep in mind, this is something that should be used to, especially those comment logs. This is a place for us to be recording internal. So someone else can keep up to date if need be or jump in. So application contact, that's typically recording contact to and from applicants. You'll probably find that this is used less often. Application comment is really important. This is where we should be recording internal HCD comments, and especially after we receive applications and we start routing those STD 213, routing the STD 213, 215 in within HCD, we should be having weekly updates in the application comment log to let us know what is going on. So keep in mind that this application comment, the most recent one, will populate on the start report. That's standard agreement, routing and tracking report. This report is always available on demand, but it is published out to HCD leadership and executive management um, on Wednesday mornings. So the requirement and the ask is that these get updated by close of business on Tuesdays to be sure that that report is up to date. So if you're needing to do a contact, we just click the add new link. We go in and you'll notice we have a few required fields. You'll notice that the date does not auto-populate here. It is possible to backdate it if needed. So enter that date. Again, you can use the calendar to select. You can use your 6 or 8 digit date. CAPES will update it for you. Just double check, make sure the date is right. What was that contact information? We've got a free entry there. You'll notice entered by, this is linked to whatever user is creating this contact. So this is always going to be linked to yourself, assuming you are logged into CAPES under your own access. And for follow-up, if you indicate yes, you will have to enter a description. Keep in mind that when you indicate a follow-up here, it will show up in the log, but it does not add a reminder to your Outlook. It doesn't send a message if someone else needs to follow up. So if there's follow-up needed, make sure that you're also setting that up in a way to make sure that that follow-up happens. And of course, submit to save. Similarly, you'll notice for the comments, we have an add new link. It'll look very similar. This is the one we need to be recording internal HCD comments about status, updates, anything like that. Again, we have our date and our comment. If we need follow-up for this one, we went ahead and kept the follow-up. You can see for here in the follow-up, that follow-up description actually shows. Some places when we have comments, you'll notice it's just an X to indicate the comment exists. But here, there is a quick and easy way to check what that follow-up should be. But again, don't forget to set the follow-up for yourself or convey that if follow-up should happen by someone else. Each time you add a contact or comment, make sure you click submit at the end. And of course, you'll want to take a look at your application overview when it appears, because this is a lovely summary of the work you just put in. If needed, you can of course print or save this. So let's take a quick look here. So comment log, definitely should get familiar with this. So you could either choose a date, you can free enter it. Whatever it may be, click submit. When we click submit, you'll notice that we go to an overview screen. You can see all of our tabs, review, underwriting, award. I really encourage using these overview screens to take a look back, make sure that everything that shows up is accurate and represented. If we have missing data, CAPES will often show that to us in red. That may not be a problem, but it's a good thing to keep an eye out for. And one other good thing to note, you'll notice we have a lot of blue links here. Say you're on this screen, you need to go back and do something. Those links will take you directly back to the screens. You don't have to start at the top at general info and go through. Right. So, of course, we're system people here in ASU, so of course we would encourage you to enter all of the data that is provided in the application and the application documents. or go through and make sure that it gets updated as soon as possible, because of course, if that data is not in CAPES and it's not in CAPES accurately, we can't actually report it out. And we then will hear people talking about, well, we can't rely on the data. Really important, especially if rent and unit mix factors into your application. Please be sure to fill that data in. If you ever have questions about it walking through, especially the project screens, the rent and unit mix screens, let us know. Funding sources, we're always happy to help. We are really happy to help walk people through, or even in small groups. So if you have a set of applications, you just want a little bit more experience, um, feel free to let us know. Get us a ticket in SolarWinds. We'll set up some time, either as a one-on-one or a small group, to go through application entry. We are always adding and updating our processes and trainings. This recording, as well as the slide deck and the PDF walkthrough process, are all posted on the Application Support Unit SharePoint page. As you've already found out, we now have our signups for trainings through HCD Learns. You might have noticed that you can go back and see if you've taken other trainings. It also shows up there as well. Um, be on the lookout. We are continually trying to add and improve our trainings, offer more options. So we thank you so much for joining us today. Um, if you have any questions, again, feel free to raise your hand or drop them into the chat. I really encourage you to go back, use that CAPES UAT access to go in and play around, get comfortable with the screens. But as always, please don't be afraid to ask for assistance, even if you're pretty sure you know what you should be doing. If it will just make you feel a little more confident to walk through with someone from ASU, we are happy to set up that time with you. Thanks so much for joining us today. And if you don't have any questions, that will take us to the end. I know this is a little bit of a longer one, so I appreciate you sticking it out with us, and hopefully get about 9 minutes back before your next meeting or task. Thanks so much. Yeah, Tanya,
Hey, Susie, great class.
thanks.
Awesome. I do have a question. Our team, we're coming up on pause round 3,
Mhm.
but what's happening with pause, we're actually doing an amendment. So it's round 2 awardees,
Mhm.
okay, getting funding, which is a new round of funding for round 3. So if you're a round 2 awardee, you're eligible for this round 3
Mhm.
funding, okay? Will we be adding new application? Because I see the job aid and it looks like we're just going in amending, see, yeah, general amendment. And I'm like really confused. Is this something we could set up training with you guys or?
Well, I guess I mean, the question is really, how is it designed? Is there an actual new NOFA being issued for the additional round? If there's not a new NOFA and they're not going to be soliciting additional applications, um, um, yeah, I guess it might be that things are just going back in. It's not necessarily a function within CAPES. I would check with um, the program manager to make sure, like, how are they setting it up? I think either way, we can help make sure that things get entered correctly. It sounds like it's possible that this one may venture into, it's possible that we may just do some award updating. So, you know how um, sometimes we have to decrease awards. It may just be that we're doing some additional awarding. So they do a new set of award letters to notify of the additional funding, And then if that's happening, there'll of course be the new award letters that I'd assume a new ADM 47 with the updated funding, and then we would actually that would actually probably in that case that would actually end up being an additional encumbered award on the awards tab, award transactions. So that is one way that we can add funding um, at the award stage. So if they're not doing a new application, because we can certainly award more than anyone's requested. So I imagine, based on what I've seen before, sometimes we just go in and we do an additional encumbered award transaction on the award transactions tab. But definitely when we get there and you guys need to record that, we can absolutely set up some time and make sure that those get entered right.
Yeah, because we do. So they're not. So what we're doing, there is no NOFA. We're treating this kind of how we did those